Imagine how you would feel if the police showed up at your home and arrested you for a crime you never committed. And then the prosecutor brings you to trial and you're convicted. Sadly, there are thousands of people who have actually experienced something similar to this. Imagine how they felt. Thankfully, this has not happened to me, so you're probably wondering how I got involved in wrongful convictions. Well, in 2016, I saw a photo in a newspaper, one photo that changed my life. The photo was of an African-American man sitting on a chair in his prison uniform with nothing but concrete walls around him. That photo caught my attention. The injustice that occurred against this man was outrageous. He was a victim, just like any other victim. But no one looked at him as a victim. I knew I had to educate others to see him and other wrongly convicted persons as victims and not as offenders. The man in the photo is Mr. Willie T. Donald. He served almost 24 years in prison for robberies and a murder he never committed. After seeing his photo, I knew I had to meet him. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to hear about his ordeal. I called his attorney and requested a meeting. Luckily, Mr. Donald agreed to meet with me. When we met, he could not look at me straight in the eyes. His brother-in-law did most of the talking. I made a promise to him that I would fight to educate the world about wrongful convictions. Within 48 hours of seeing his photo, my life as a criminal justice professor turned upside down. After meeting him, I realized that I only taught my students how the system was supposed to work, but never taught them how the system really works. As you probably understand, I promised this man that I would be a voice for the voiceless. So here I am tonight, keeping my promise. All we have to do is turn on the TV or go on the internet and hear about another wrongly convicted person. Some of you probably have a hard time wrapping your head around the fact that innocent people spend years in prison. It is hard to understand. And so much of what we hear is simply not true. First of all, an exoneree is lumped into the same category as an ex-offender. Exonerees and ex-offenders are not the same. Innocent persons who were wrongly convicted and released from prison are exonerees, while ex-offenders are those who actually committed a crime. And for those currently doing prison time, they're all referred to as offenders. I challenge this label. While they're all prisoners or inmates, they're not all offenders. I hadn't thought about this until I heard a warden refer to inmates as offenders. I stopped myself from screaming, they're not all offenders. Some are innocent inmates who do not belong here. But I said nothing. Ashamed, I left that conversation more determined than ever to put a spotlight on the very fact that innocent men and women are languishing in prison while the real perpetrators go unpunished. Tonight, let's play devil's advocate. Let me debunk some myths of wrongful convictions for you. The first myth, the system rarely gets it wrong. Fact, you may be surprised to learn that there are tens of thousands of innocent people sitting in prison. They're still there because they don't have money for DNA testing. They don't have money to hire experts to help prove their innocence, or they have used up all of their legal channels and are now stuck behind bars. Another myth, prosecutors are fact finders for the truth. The reality is that we have a criminal justice system that pits two sides against each other. It's like a game, and everyone wants to win. Sometimes a prosecutor's quest for conviction overshadows what they should be doing, and that is searching for the truth. At times, they are so eager to win that they engage in misconduct. How do they engage in misconduct? Well, some prosecutors withhold evidence from a judge and a jury that would be beneficial to the defense. Did you know that they're not supposed to do that? Prosecutors are required to provide all evidence to the defense, even evidence that they know will hurt their own case. Even though they're required to do so, they don't always do this. Why not? Because they can get away with it. Prosecutors have absolute immunity, which protects them from civil and criminal penalties. Seriously, does that seem right? Not to me. No one should ever be above the law, particularly those who are in positions to uphold the law. Another myth, defense attorneys are the strongest advocates for the defendant. I'm sure you know that public defenders have the best intentions, but there are several factors which make it difficult, if not impossible, for them to be a strong advocate. First of all, they have way too many cases. They may have 100 plus cases at one given time. Imagine that. Then they don't have the money to conduct a solid investigation. Well, who has that money? Well, prosecutors have money. They have money. The prosecutors have money to hire experts, and they have money to conduct DNA testing. And if you haven't thought about this, think about this for a moment. Have you believed someone is guilty before they went to trial? I'm sure you have, because I know I have. That is because I only heard what the prosecutor said. Public defenders don't talk to the media, so all we hear is what the prosecutor tells us. So it's no surprise when a suspect is found guilty. Let's be honest, jurors may be biased because of what they heard about the defendant in the media. All of these factors contribute to bad lawyering. Not intentionally, but it happens. And at the end of the day, bad lawyering leads to innocent people being wrongly convicted. If we want fairness, public defenders should be given equal manpower and financial resources as the prosecutor's office. It's like giving one runner in a race a major head start and hoping the other runner can catch up. Another myth: eyewitness identification is the best testimony. Did you know that the leading cause of wrongful convictions is mistaken eyewitness identification? Once a victim points to the suspect in a lineup, that seals the suspect's fate. I mean, why wouldn't it? Why would a victim pick out the wrong person in a lineup if it wasn't him or it wasn't her? Well, it happens for different reasons. I just don't have time tonight to go over all these reasons, but I do have time to go back to the case of Mr. Donald, who was wrongly convicted because of eyewitness misidentification. In 1992 in Gary, Indiana, there were a string of robberies all in one night, and one ended up in a murder. Victims from each robbery all described the robber as someone who had a scarred face. At the police station, detectives brought in one robbery victim and then brought in the fiance of the murdered robbery victim and placed them in the same room for a photo lineup. I'm not a detective, but I would think that's a big no-no. You don't put two witnesses in the same room at the same time. One feeds off of the other. Ultimately, as expected, both victims picked out the same person, Mr. Donald. Mr. Donald did not have a scarred face, but based solely on these two women's identification, Mr. Donald was convicted. There was no other shred of evidence pointing to Mr. Donald. You're probably wondering how his picture ended up in the photo lineup. His picture was taken by the police years earlier when he was brought to the police station, wrongly suspected of stealing a car that was borrowed from his friend's uncle. That should have been the end of it, but the police kept his photo and introduced it into a lineup for robberies and murder years later. No evidence, no nothing, but two women identifying the wrong man led to an innocent man sitting in prison for almost 24 years. Here's another myth: innocent people do not falsely confess. The reality is that people do falsely confess to crimes that they did not commit. Why would they do that? Some people falsely confess to a crime to gain notoriety, or some actually believe they committed the crime, even though they're innocent. Others falsely confess to get out of an aggressive and very long interrogation. Did you know that the police can lie and tell you that they have evidence that proves that you committed a crime, even when they have no such proof? Police may also threaten or abuse you until you confess. Have you heard of Chicago Police Commander John Burge and his Midnight Crew? Well, I'm going to tell you about them. In the 1970s through the 1990s, 120 men reported that they had been tortured, they had been beaten, they had been electrocuted, they had been shocked. Abuses so bad that I can't even say them to you tonight. They had been beaten and tortured by Burge and his Midnight Crew until they falsely confessed. Out of the 120 men who had been tortured, 110 of them were African American males. Many of these men spent decade after decade in prison, and some are still there. And the midnight crew, they walked away unscathed. Another myth: trust the experts, the CSI effect. The bottom line is that forensic science is flawed. In a post-CSI era, jurors are mesmerized by forensic science, listening to experts testify on mitochondrial DNA, fingerprint analysis, blood splatter patterns, ballistics, serology. I could go on and on. They don't fully understand the science. The testimony, however, is valued as gold. It is the gold standard in a conviction. It is the end all for jurors. At times, forensic experts intentionally or unintentionally present evidence based on faulty methods, or they exaggerate, or they mislead the findings. As humans are the drive behind forensic science, it's inevitable that human error may occur. Whether a mistake was made intentionally or not, the results are catastrophic. Another myth: people can't be convicted of crimes that never happened. I'll say it again. People can't be convicted of crimes that never happened. As you know, innocent people are wrongly convicted for crimes someone else committed. But did you know that there are people who are wrongly convicted for crimes that never actually happened? I can hear you now saying to yourself, wait, what did she say? Well, I'll say it again. People have been wrongly convicted for crimes that never even happened. What happens is that police and prosecutors create a narrative that a suicide is a homicide, self-defense is murder, an accidental fire is an arson, and a sex crime occurred that never ever happened. The reality is that women are the primary targets of these no crime cases. The National Registry of Exoneration reports that 63% of female exonerees were wrongly convicted for crimes that never happened. It happened in 1995 to one Indiana mom who was wrongly convicted for the murder of her toddler son. She didn't kill her son. Sadly, he died in an accidental fire. She did not commit arson, nor did she commit murder, but the state listened to an arson investigator who fabricated evidence for no other reason than to make himself an expert. His lies left an innocent, grieving mother in prison for 17 years. The last myth: you would think exonerees are compensated once they're finally free. The reality is that many exonerees will never receive 1 penny for their wrongful conviction. In states that do have compensation, exonerees are faced with insulting monetary awards, and some have to fight. They have to fight to receive their compensation. For example, in Indiana, exonerees have to apply for compensation, and a panel determines whether the exoneree has proven his or her factual innocence. How does an exoneree without money or adequate resources hire experts to prove their innocence? Keep in mind that just because a person has been exonerated does not mean the state recognizes that they are factually innocent. So they are faced with proving their own innocence. Here is the fact: exonerees are often kicked out of prison with nothing. Remember Mr. Donald, the man I introduced you to? When he was released from prison, all the state gave him was a bag to put his few belongings in. The state didn't help him find a place to live, a job, a car, nothing. They didn't even say, "I'm sorry" for what they did. In my opinion, the state acts like exonerees should be grateful for their release. That is beyond disgraceful. The reality is that the criminal justice actors who contributed to the wrongful conviction, they should be grateful. They should be grateful that exonerees are most forgiving. We must recognize who the true victim is, and that is the wrongly convicted person. Let's offer them our kindness and our assistance, just like we do for crime victims. And let's punish the bad actors who intentionally rob year after year from innocent men and women. At the end of the day, these folks never thought something like this could happen to them. Sadly, it did, and it could happen to any one of us here tonight. So let's stop allowing our criminal justice actors to create victims by wrongly convicting innocent people. Thank you.